Hello everyone, I'm here today to do my October wrap-up, and I read 11 books and 2,600, 14 pages, which is not too bad considering how much I had going on this month. And I also have to point out that this month I did read quite a few more ebooks and audiobooks than I would normally do. But that's just the nature of it. I was traveling for a big part of it, so ebooks were easier. So the first book I finished was Second Hand Time by Svetlana Alexievich, and this is a non-fiction about the lives of people in Soviet Russia and I think post-Soviet Russia as well, if I remember correctly. It is Svetlana Alexievich does this a lot. She does a lot of interviews and then she collects them in a book. I read her book about Chernobyl before and I found that a little bit more repetitive, but because this book focuses on a much expansive and much bigger event, let's say, so it's a lot more years, there's a lot more variety on the kind of experiences that these people have. It was a lot more interesting to me and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I recommend this one. The next book I read was Letti Park by Judith Hermann, and this is kind of like short stories about just life and love of different people. Letti Park is a park in Berlin, and some people are associated with it in different ways, and we follow their stories. Some of them were fine, but in general, I don't find short stories very long lasting, and this one's no exception. I read it about a month ago and I can barely remember any of the stories, so this one was not super impactful. The next book that I finished was The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden, which was longlisted and I think shortlisted for the Booker this year, and it basically follows a very dysfunctional Dutch family, and like the issues they have. So there are 3 siblings. 2 of them are gay and they're trying to grab their thoughts about that, but also it seems to be a common thing at that time that when the Jewish people were put in concentration camps, their houses were sold for almost nothing to people. So with the family that we are following took over one of those houses, and there's a lot of history in that house and stuff. It's told in a very darkly humorous way, which I enjoyed. I don't think it's like the most amazing deep book ever, but it was a fun ride to listen to, and I enjoyed it. The next book I finished was Land of Smoke by Sara Gallardo, and this is kind of stories about South America, and they're funny, darkly funny, cynical stories. And there's a lot of talk about colonialism and things like that. It reminded me a little bit of Galeano. I still prefer Galeano, but it's the same kind of tone of this tongue-in-cheek, kind of funny but very critical style, and I really enjoyed them as well. I do really enjoy Galeano, and this really reminded of it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one as well. Next book I finished was Playground by Richard Powers, and I have a review of this coming soon. But yeah, this is about several people that are associated with the ocean in different ways. So we have a woman that is an oceanographer. We have a couple that live in Polynesia, and we have a man that is trying to make some AI kind of thing, and he's trying to establish it first, like a prototype in one of these islands, because it's kind of easy to do because it's so isolated and stuff like that. And they have a lot of history together as well. I think that some of these parts, I mean, Richard Powers' writing is beautiful, and some of these parts are really powerful, but also some of them were not. I found that this was trying to be the overstory a little bit, but it was less expansive but not reductive enough, and I found that it felt a little bit formulaic after reading a few of his books. I also found the jumping of timelines a little bit difficult to follow at first. I think we jump a lot more, not only on perspective but also on timeline and backstory and stuff like that in this, and that didn't work so well for me. And then also I found that the AI part of it was done in a quite surface level, and it was one of the main points of the book, which I didn't particularly get on with. I understand the point of colonialism and stuff, and I think the points that it wants to make are very good, and I'm happy if people really enjoy this. For me, it was an okay book, which is disappointing because I really like other things by Richard Powers, so this was a little bit of a disappointment for me, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily super bad or anything. The next book I finished was Shadows of the Tundra by Dalia Grinkevičiūtė, something like that. I'm sorry when I butchered that, but I really enjoyed this. This is a memoir of a Lithuanian girl that was taken to the gulags when she was little by the USSR, and she was forced to work on the camps in horrible conditions, and I thought that was really powerful. It was also very well written, very harrowing. It had pictures of the people, which is always nice. And yeah, I have read a couple of things about the gulags before, but somehow this felt more impactful. I think the way it was organized, it was much better. But also the fact that it's a real story and it's not overly emotionally manipulative like some of these things are. Sometimes things about the Holocaust and things about the gulags and stuff are just trying to make you feel sorry for these people, and being emotionally manipulative, but I didn't feel that this was just the story of a person that lived through it and wanted to tell the story. So yeah, I found that really powerful and really good. The next book that I read was The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut, and this was a little bit of Labatut's style of taking a scientist's life and going with it and explaining why he's disturbing in some ways. I think the how we cease to understand the world followed more people and was better in a way, because this one follows mostly John von Neumann, and he was a mathematician that he did a lot of things that are now being used in computer science and AI. He was kind of obsessed with that. He was also part of the Manhattan Project to make the nuclear bomb, and it also seemed like he was not the most humanly kind character. There's comments on how when they saw how powerful the nuclear war and the nuclear bomb was, a lot of the scientists involved in the project agreed that they shouldn't use it anywhere. And John von Neumann was like, no, I want to destroy these people because they destroyed me and my family, and I had to run away because of them. So yeah, that was kind of disturbing. But then the second half of the book goes into AI used in games, like this Blue Deep that won this famous match of chess against the master of chess, and also how they now can play Go, which seems to be a lot more chaotic and complicated game that is difficult to predict. So there is talked about how von Neumann's ideas went farther into that, and also like the lives of the masters of these games that were beaten by AI, and how that felt, and how what the role of AI and that kind of thing is, and why that is like a testimony of how much AI has moved forward. but I felt like that was a little bit out of place. Like I understand the connection, but I don't think it's strong enough to make a book about the two things together. I like the von Neumann part, but the other part was just a bit out of the blue. And yeah, I think this felt a little bit chaotic in the structure, which was not as good as I was hoping. Also, like the parts of von Neumann um, were mostly told from people around him instead of him himself. Like, obviously he didn't write this, but like the perspective. So about his wife, his colleagues, stuff like that, which I thought it was interesting. And if the book would have been just that, I think it would have been a stronger book. But yeah, it was just a little bit messy for me. The next one I finished was Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa, and I got this as a proof in NetGalley, so thank you NetGalley for letting me read this book. And this was honestly very weird. It was about this woman that had a severe disability, like a hunchback, and she was living in this care facility because the disability was so severe, and she's kind of obsessed with having sex, um, and so she has a lot of money because of her parents left her a lot of money, and so she uses that money to try to have sex, but not only have sex, she wants to be pregnant, but she knows that with her disability, a pregnancy is not viable, so she becomes obsessed with having an abortion, and that's all she wants to in life. It's to have an abortion, and for that she first has to get pregnant and then abort. And that's like she spends all the book trying to get that and what the consequences of that was, which I thought it was very weird and disturbing. And I understand the point that was trying to make about how disabled people are still people and they still have similar needs to the other rest of humanity, which I thought was a good point to have, but the way it went about it, I just found it a little bit, yeah, not that interesting. This is gonna sound like I'm a prude, but I'm not that interested in sex in books. Not because I think there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like I found it completely uninteresting to read about sex and like people wanting to have sex. Um, so yeah, not the book for me, but I'm sure it will be good for someone else. Next book I read was Matrescence by Lucy Jones, and this was part of the long list for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. Um, and I was very interested in this because I had heard a lot of good things from mothers about this. And matrescence is the idea that when you become a mother, like physiologically and like chemically, your brain changes, and we should honor those changes. So matrescence is like that transition between not being a mother and not being a mother, in a similar way as adolescence is the time period between becoming a child and becoming an adult. And normally when we talk about adolescence, we know it's hard, we try to help the people through it, and there is a lot more knowledge and a lot more awareness of that process. And this is like the process between not being a mother and being a mother, again, not only like in terms of life but also in terms of like your body. It changes a lot, and it is hard as well. It's as hard as adolescence, but we don't give that credit to it. We expect mothers to be the same before and after, just same person with or without a child, which is completely not how it works. And this book explores that idea, and what would be the the support that is needed through that process. And that's all, I think. So I find that Lucy Jones is not the most rigorous writer. She made a few mistakes in vocabulary on this, like she called the menstrual cycle the time where you bleed, and that's not, the menstrual cycle is like the 30-40 days that's between bleedings. Things like that, like small details like that, irk me, because if she's not rigorous on those things, then what is the chances that the other stuff is rigorous enough? But other than that, like I really agreed with her points. I think it's a good thing to recognize, and it's a necessary thing for more people to be aware that motherhood has a lot of challenges, and it's a lot more difficult than most people think. Not because people don't think it's difficult, but I think most people think, okay, when like that is difficult because you don't sleep properly for a month or 2 or 3, but for some people that goes on for years and years, and like having 4 hours of sleep a night for years, but also because your brain just changes and you have to grapple with this completely new, different person that you are, and a lot of other things, and I don't think there's enough recognition of how hard that is. It also talked about some things that I personally have felt as well, as a mother, that I thought were weird, and they are apparently not. Like, it talks a lot about, there's a part in which she talks about that there is a surprisingly high amount of new mothers that think about breaking a non very important, very minor bone in their bodies, so that they can spend a couple of days in hospital and not have to care about anyone or anything. And yeah, I didn't think about breaking my own body, but when I left the hospital after having my baby, I did think, like, I wish I could go back to the hospital so that someone can take care of me. So yeah, things like that. It was interesting. I think, yeah. It also talks about the crazily high expectations that we have on mothers, and how that negatively affects the mental health, and basically how dangerous it is to have all these ideas of super high standards for the mother, and all that matters is the child, and if the child is fine, then you should be fine and you should be happy. Like, one of the most notable examples of that is breastfeeding. A lot of people really struggle with breastfeeding, and it's horrible for them. It can be very painful, it can be exhausting if the baby has to be fed every 2 or 3 hours for many months. I don't think people understand how much work that is, and it's good for the baby. Yeah, sure, it's good for the baby, and for some mothers it works fine. I had no issue with that, but for a lot of people it's not, and they are still pushed and pushed and pushed to do it because it's healthier for the baby, and you want your baby to be healthy, right? But it's not healthy for them, and a lot of those people end up with mental health issues because of this. And so it's, yeah, you should care about your baby, but to which point? To a point that makes you sick doesn't make sense. And these are a lot of things that we need to consider when we're talking about motherhood, and we often don't. So this book brings light to a lot of those things, and I think it's important. I just wish that Lucy Jones was a little bit more rigorous with the way she writes. The next book that I finished was Carmilla by Sheridan Fanu, which is a classic, a horror classic. And I read this for my book club. It's a kind of a novella, and it's about these two girls. So there is this girl in a castle in the middle of nowhere in Austria, and then this other girl comes around, and they become obsessed with each other. But it turns out that the second girl, the one that came, happens to be a vampire, and she doesn't tell. So it's kind of like a romance, but also not so romantic relationship, I would say. Not very healthy relationship between these two women, which is cool because this was written in the late 1800s, and it's, I mean, I guess you could read it as they are besties, roommates, but I think for today's sensibilities, it's very clear that they have a romance, and so that's cool. But yeah, other than that, we had this discussion in the book club. It feels very generic as a vampire story, and that's probably because this was the first one. So this one is kind of like what started this genre, and it has been copied and influenced a lot of other things, including Dracula. Um, but for now, for all the things that we know now, it just feels generic because it's everywhere, and it's everywhere because this was the first one, which is interesting. So it, like, the context around it is more interesting than the book itself in some ways. um, yeah, I didn't particularly like it or dislike it. I thought it was okay, but yeah, that was interesting. I think the context of this one is the one that makes it special rather than the book itself. And then the last book that I finished this month is The Adventures of Amina al-Shirafi by Shannon Chakraborti. And I have read the City of Brass books, and I really enjoyed them. This one was different. So this one follows a pirate, a retired pirate. She's in her 40s, and she has a kid, which I didn't know, and it's cool. She has a 10-year-old kid, and for reasons she has to come back into her boat and her pirate days, um, and she puts together back her crew, and some of them are also parents, and they're having like a chill life, um, very stable life, and she has to take them out of that to go back into the ship and try to stop this man from getting this very powerful tool so that he controls the world, basically. And it's like, I think they are supposed to be based somewhere around the east coast of Africa. They talk about Mogadishu and Madagascar and stuff like that. And the man that is trying to steal this is French, I think. So pants on colonialism. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I think it was a little bit slow at the beginning. Like, the first half of this book is basically about her getting back her crew and putting things together, and then the second half is actually about going in this adventure, which I thought the pacing was a bit weird in this book. I for sure the pacing of this was weird, and it's set up to be a 5-book series, I think. Because of things that happen at the end, she's like charged to find 5 of these magical objects. I thought it was a standalone, but I don't think it is. But yeah, it was fun, but it was not as good as the City of Brass ones, and I enjoyed it enough. But it's not like my favorite ever or anything. It's always good fun to read fantasy every once in a while. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed this. But yeah, as I said, the pacing was weird, and it took me a long time to get into the story because of that. So that's all the books I read this month. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you read good things. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you like them or dislike them. And until next video, bye!